Mendocino, do you have any regrets about how the protesters were treated by your police? Hey folks, this is William Diaz here with Rebel News, here in Ottawa at the Emergencies Act inquiry. And while we have heard on November 22nd from Marco Mendocino, the Liberal Public Safety Minister that's currently in power, Mendocino isn't in the habit of telling the truth, and you can learn more about this, about his distant relationship with reality at firemendocino.com. And Tuesday, a number of people had the same feeling. Mendocino stated multiple times in Parliament during question period that law enforcement had asked for the Emergencies Act prior to its invocation.
The Ontario Association, the Canadian Association, law enforcement was very strong.
That's the reason why we had to invoke the Emergencies Act, and we did so on the basis of non-partisan professional advice from law enforcement.
We wanted to be sure at bottom that we were giving law enforcement all of the tools and the resources that they needed.
It was only after police told us that they needed this special power.
We were following the advice of various levels of law enforcement, including the RCMP. We invoked the act because it was the advice of nonpartisan professional law enforcement.
After calling upon the police forces, we invoked the Emergency Measures Act.
I don't want to speak for every last serving member of law enforcement, but there was a very strong consensus that we needed to invoke the act.
However, Commissioner Lucky testified that it was false.
Did you ask the government or representatives for the invocation of the Emergencies Act?
No, there was never a question of requesting the Emergency Act. There was a question.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm sorry. So you never asked for it. Do you know of any other police leadership that asked specifically the government for the invocation?
No, we actually reached out to various police agencies when there was talk about some of the authorities within that they were proposing, and of course we were consulted because we were the ones who would be using those authorities, so we were consulted to see if they would be of any use to police.
And essentially that's why we're here. The Public Order Emergency Commission is a fail-safe built into the Emergencies Act law to prevent authoritarian leaders from using it unjustifiably and unnecessarily. And Trudeau back in February used it on peaceful protesters part of the Freedom Convoy, who traveled from all across the country to Ottawa to protest the federal COVID-19 mandates. Now, Mendocino was forced to submit to some scrutiny for his role in the use of the Emergencies Act. Take a look at part of what he had to say.
That was true, but I would add that there were reports of flare-ups. There was an exchange between the mayor and I. There were also public reports following that and some information that we had received in subsequent briefings about the threat of the blockade coming back to the Ambassador Bridge. I would point out that it was a recurring theme over those 2 weeks that progress was not linear, that it was very much a whack-a-mole kind of dynamic, and the idea was not only to restore public safety but to maintain it. And the objective of invoking the Emergencies Act was to maintain law and order, to stop the whack-a-mole. Well, it was after the first minister's meeting, and it was through a series of conversations with staff and officials. So it would have been, and I can't say exactly what time, but it would have been I believe in the afternoon, early afternoon to mid-afternoon.
Do you recall being informed of Premier Kenney's position on this?
I recall seeing that was Minister LeBlanc's looks like a cut and paste of what Premier Kenney had relayed to him.
Okay, and I take it you disagree with Premier Kenney's position?
Yes.
But is it true, though, that the Liberal platform in September of 2021 dealt with a mandatory vaccination policy across the entire federal service and on federally regulated transportation?
Yes, we put that to the electorate in the 21 election.
When the cross-examination period began, Brendan Miller, the lawyer for Freedom Corp, basically the entity representing key players of the convoy, attempted to subpoena Alex Cohen, Mendocino's head of communications, to testify at the inquiry. Previously admitted into evidence showed Cohen texting Mary Liz Power from the Prime Minister's office back in January, before the convoy even arrived, about being in contact with members of the media to share their narrative. And that coming down too hard on the convoy might push out the crazies, he said. He wanted the crazies to stay in the convoy. Watch how the situation unfolded.
I've just met Mr. Alexander Cohen. He's present in this room. And sir, Mr. Cohen, as we have heard throughout this proceeding, has relevant and material evidence to this proceeding's mandate. He has very relevant evidence with respect to the inquiry as to the circumstances, as to the invocation of the Emergencies Act. He also has relevant and material information with respect to misinformation, of which this commission has been tasked with exploring, beginning with the text messages between himself and Mary Liz Power that are already in evidence in building the narrative with respect to the protesters in Ottawa being extremists, and thereafter essentially setting out that they are in fact proprietors of Nazi symbolism. Sir, this commission has been hearing from various.
Can I just interrupt?
Yeah.
What's your application?
I'd like to call him as a witness, sir.
Well, have you written any? Is there
I didn't expect that we would have the opportunity.
Well, you haven't at the moment. There's no application. So
Well, this is my application, sir. I'm making it orally, and I'm asking for the commission to have him testify after the minister. He has relevant material information.
I'm not going to do this orally right now.
Well, sir, we're given 15 minutes to cross-examine, to elicit relevant and material evidence. And we have relevant and material witnesses here. The government of Canada has redacted without lawful authority all of these statements from these staffers and have suppressed records.
I have no idea at this point where this is going, so I'm going to take the break. And if you can speak to Commission Counsel, which I think I've repeated many times, is the way to at least raise the issue.
Yes.
And then we'll see if they can resolve it or not. But we have a schedule. And
sir, the schedule is not as important at getting to the truth.
There's no question we want to get at the truth, but you know what? It's a very complex issue, and it's not all about what you want. It's about what the commission needs to do, what the parties want to do.
And I think it's what Canadians are entitled to, sir.
I'm trying to control a process.
Brendan Miller was temporarily removed from the commission room. Watch.
Is reconvened. La commission reprend.
Sir, okay, the Commission Counsel has not completed her
I understand, but sir, and your counsel's advised you that.
No,
I know you've directed, you wanted the application.
I'm speaking.
Yes, sir.
The application, if you want to do it, you've been advised it's to be done in writing, not in the middle of the
Sir, we
presentation.
filed 2 motions in writing at your direction that you've refused to rule on with respect to the redaction of documents from the government of Canada.
You're speaking,
that has not been ruled on, and they've been filed for days.
I will take a break while you're asked to leave. I will return in 5 minutes if security could deal with the council.
When he was outside, Miller conducted a media scrum for the first time since the inquiry began and touched on what he calls unlawful redactions of document, quote unquote.
Made 2, actually 3 technically, written applications with respect to these redacted documents in advance of the ministers testifying. And the commission has failed or refused to rule on them. And one of the other grounds of procedural fairness is for decisions without undue delay. When decisions are not made on procedural issues of this importance without undue delay, procedural fairness of not just my clients, but everyone's is violated. Canadians are entitled to the truth, and you can't hide behind unlawful redactions in a public inquiry, claiming baseless redactions on staffer correspondence because it may hurt you. And that, in my view, is what the government of Canada is doing. And it needs to stop. And had we had a timely ruling on these redactions, this application made orally today would have been entirely unnecessary.
Is it your expectation to continue?
Sorry, which the application for Alex Cohen would have been entirely unnecessary?
Correct.
Is it your expectation to continue in the proceedings today?
Yes. Well, it's my client's constitutional right to have legal representation of their choice.
Is there another lawyer as part of the team that could step in for you if you're not allowed?
My client's choice is to have me. And with respect to being thrown out of the building at the direction of the commissioner, there is no jurisdiction to do that either. So it is what it is. We'll wait and we'll see.
Is that your next steps then? You're just going to wait for some response from the commissioner now?
Response more so from security. It's up to security whether or not I'm allowed in the building, and it's up to the commissioner whether or not he'll abide by my client's constitutional right to have the lawyer of their choice and the procedural fairness and constitutional right to be heard before the tribunal.
A document presented near the end of Mendocino's testimony from Jody Thomas of the NSI, the National Security Intelligence, stated that the threshold for the Section 2 of the CSIS Act wasn't met prior to the act being invoked. Watch how that was presented, what was written, and what Mendocino had to say in response to that.
Okay. NES spoke with NSIA, it looks like, and Jody Thomas, but the NSIA is Jody Thomas. Section 2 of the CSIS Act, violence not met. Wonder if we need full 30 days if Ottawa cleared. I suppose the question would be, Minister, were you aware that it had been concluded that Section 2 of the CSIS Act was not met?
Sorry, what is the date of this note?
I'm afraid I don't know.
Well, look, leaving that aside, yes,
It
I was.
says it's before the speech Monday morning, which
Okay.
is the date that they announced the invocation. That might assist.
Okay. Yes, I was aware that CSIS had concluded that Section 2 under the CSIS Act was not met. I was aware of that fact.
After his testimony, my colleague Celine Gallus and I both put a question to Marco Mendocino, and he did not provide any answer and refused to conduct a media scrum with all the journalists who were there. He, however, did wish a nice evening to Celine. Mr. Mendocino, do you have any regrets about how the protesters were treated by your police?
Mr. Mendocino, if you believe that Alberta needed the EA to deal with Coots, why wasn't it mentioned in the 10 times that you had communications? Good evening to you too. Do you want to answer my question, Mr. Mendocino?
Well, there you have it. Marco Mendocino, the Liberal Minister of Public Safety. Later in the day, we saw Dominic LeBlanc, Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs for Justin Trudeau, testify as well. More high-level ministers will also appear at the commission in the following week. This definitely should be good. For Rebel News, this is William Diaz. If you guys want to support our independent journalism here in Ottawa, straight from Canada's national capital, there's only a few days left. You can head on to truckercommission.com, and there you'll be able to see all of our content we did for the past 6 weeks about the inquiry.